Welcome to JavaScript Talks. In this video, we're going to learn bind function in JavaScript. The first question is, why do we need the bind function? Let me give you an example. Let's say I have one object called user, and definitely user should have one name. Let's say the name is Bob, and also we have a function show name, and this is going to print this dot name, or let's just say username is this dot name. Now if I call user dot show name and let me run this code, we get username is Bob. This works perfectly. But what happens when we create a function here? Okay, suppose I'm creating a function called show name or something show. Okay, inside that I'm moving this console log and I'm calling the show function. What should happen now? It should print this dot name, right? That means Bob. But no, if I run this code, see, username is undefined. What is happening here? Definitely when you create a new function, that this keyword refers to something else, not what we're expecting. That is a problem. So normally what we do when we create a function and inside that function we use this keyword, we normally bind this context, right, like this. And also we have another option, like we can create a variable called var, let's say dat instead of this. Okay, that equals to this, so we are storing this object in the dat variable, and let's just call dat.name here. If I run this, now it is working perfectly. Okay, in this scenario we are able to use that variable because our function is inside the outer function. The inner function can call the variable from outer function using closure, but sometimes we cannot do that. Suppose we have another function in this object called maybe some private function, so starting with underscore show. Okay, and instead of defining the function here, I'm actually defining the function in this object. So if I call this.show, now if I run the code, everything works fine. Because in JavaScript, when you call a function with a dot keyword, then the dot keyword sends the context. So in this case, this object, that is the user, that is becoming the context of this show function. But suppose I have to pass this show function to somewhere else. Let's say, for example, I have one set timeout function, right? In that I'm passing this dot underscore show after maybe 1 or 100 millisecond, right? What should happen now? We are passing only this dot show. In this case, if I run the code, you can clearly see that username is undefined because the context of show is not the object user. So this is a perfect scenario where we have to use the bind keyword. In this case, we have to bind the context here. All right, bind this. Now if I run, it works fine. So what is happening here? What is the use of this bind? What it is doing? So this bind function will create a new function where the context is always the object user. This is how bind works. We bind one context in a function. So in that case, it doesn't matter how you call the bound function, your context will be preserved in that function. This is how bind function works, but to understand its working principle, why not just implement it? Try it, stop the video and try to implement the bind function. Okay, I will implement it now. So let's say I have a function called my bind function, and it is going to take one parameter called the function that we are trying to bind and the context. Okay, now the idea is to bind this context inside that function in such a way that no matter how you call the new function, the context will always be there. Definitely we have to create a new function, so let's return a new function. Okay, I'm creating a new function and returning it. Now inside that function, what we're going to do, we're going to call this function, right? But in this way, if we call this function, this context will not work. We have to find a way to pass this context inside this function. How we do that? We can use call context. Okay, you can also use apply here, call or apply. Okay, so I'm going to test this. So let's create a new function called bound function equals to, we'll use our new myBind function, going to pass this underscore show, and we'll bind the context this. Now if I pass that bound function in set timeout, what should happen? Let's run this program, and it's working perfectly. So in this case, we have created our own bind function. This is that simple. But you might ask, why should I have to use call or apply? Without call or apply, can you do it? Again, pause the video and try it. Okay, let's do it. I'm going to write this myBind function without using call or apply. Now think about it. If I don't have this call or apply, how we're going to make sure that this variable, this context, this is going to be used to call this function? Do you remember that I told you that when we call using this dot keyword, like object dot function name, then the function is called with that object as a context, right? Can we use that same thing here? So the thing is, we have a context object, right? If I use something like this, context dot some function name, then our problem is solved. The function name, this function is going to be called with the context, right? So let's do that. Why not use context dot, let's call it inner function, or let's call it underscore fn, right, equals to function. And then, so what I'm doing here is I'm adding this function object inside the context so that I can call with the dot keyword. So here I'm going to call context dot underscore fn function, right? If I run this, it works. Can you see how simple the bind function is? Just 3 lines of code. Okay, now you can say that, okay, now you are polluting the context, right? I'm creating a new property. Now why would I do that? You should not pollute the context. So let's fix that also. So instead of adding fn in the context, why not create a new object? Okay, so I'm going to create a new object where maybe new context, but this new context is going to inherit our context. So object.create context, and I'm going to use this new context to set our function, and then I'm going to call that. Let's run this, and this works without polluting the context. So what I'm doing here, I'm inheriting the context. This is called prototypal inheritance, right? So we are creating a new object using object.create. That means the new context prototype will be context. So whenever I'm calling underscore fn, whenever I'm trying to access this name, it is going to search that name in new context. If it cannot find it, then it will go to the prototype chain, remember? So eventually it will go to context and name will be found. So how is it? Have you learned something? Let me know in the comment. And if you liked the video, please hit like and subscribe to JavaScript Talks. And thank you so much for watching.